Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever we're joining. And thank you so much for joining today's webinar with the title Inside Nigerians Norms Shifts, Faith, Media, and Influencing Norms, Inspiring Change, the Role of Entertainers and Faith Leaders. We are gathered here to explore something very deeply and something very powerful. And I know that all of us are very passionate. So we're gathered here to explore something very deeply. And I'm trying to set the tone for this. Please feel free to use the chat box so that you can tell us from which part of the world you're actually joining the call today. So we all know that entertainers and faith leaders hold a unique influence in our communities. They don't just share messages, they shape beliefs, values, and everyday practices. And today, with our amazing panelists and in this conversation, we'll unpack how that influence can actually be harnessed to challenge harmful norms and inspire more inclusive, equitable futures. And we have a presentation that will walk you through, and then we're also going to have a panel discussion. So yeah, briefly, we have 1 hour and we will try as much as possible to stick to time. So we'll have a timekeeper and we have a few housekeeping rules. And we are going to have the introductions. So please use the chat box to introduce yourself, your name, your organization, designation, and then the country you're joining from. And then we're also going to walk through commitment and contributions. So at the end of the webinar, you would be able to share your thoughts, insight, and comments in the chat box to actively participate in the discussions. So in the case we're having any conversation and you have anything, please feel free to use the chat box. We also have speaking requests. So in that sense where you need to speak, please use the emoticons that we have on the call, where you can actually raise your hand and one of our team members would actually give you the permission to speak. And then we're also going to walk through social commitments. So we encourage you to share your key learnings and insights on social media. We have a hashtag that is road to GS25 and then hashtag GS25, hashtag new voices, inclusive society, PIC. So that's the hashtag. Please feel free to take a snapshot before we move to the next slide. And then we also are going to have a Q&A where we will answer your questions during the presentation and also during the panel discussion. So feel free to use the chat box to drop your messages. And we have some of our team members that are responsible for collating these messages, and we'll get back to it. So we have objectives of the webinar, which include we are all here to disseminate key evidence on social norms, how they are shifting in Nigeria, and the role of faith leaders and media. And then we're also going to look through in facilitating knowledge exchange by sharing evidence and lived experiences on what drives meaningful change. That's where we have our panelists. And then also the third objective today is to distill practical lessons for policy programming and advocacy. And that's why we have different experts on the call so that we'll hear from their lived experiences and other gatherings from our, let's say, desk reviews, our research, and other findings that we have. So we're setting the tone with an icebreaker. So please feel free to scan the barcode and let's have this quick session. So if you're having any challenges, please feel free to drop your message in the chat box and let's start. Let me also take the, okay, thank you. Your messages are coming in. So please, if you're having any challenge with the icebreaker, do let us know in the chat box and we have our team that is responsible for supporting us on that. All right, please can we use the thumbs up to know if we're all on the first question that we have? Please let's get a reaction. Your introductions are coming in. Thank you all for joining. Hi, Ernest. Please, we're done with the poll. So can you let us see what the reactions are from the poll? We need to see the responses from the poll before we move so that at least we can have an idea. Yeah, perfect.
Yes, coming up.
All right, great. Thank you. All right. We have 16 people. So the question goes, you visit someone's house and they offer you food. You are actually hungry. What is the socially correct response? So we have 16 people going for politely decline the food and accept the bottle of Maltina they offer instead. And we also have people say thank you and accept it immediately. And then we have a vote for, oh no, thank you, I just eat, and wait for them to persuade you at least twice. So the essence of bringing this up is for us to understand the link between for the link between our own social cultural norms and then your belief or authenticity as a person. So because it's a norm, usually, more especially while growing up, like you need to say no, no, thank you. And then when they offer it again, that's when you actually accept it. When in terms of our authenticity, it's more like, okay, I just want to get it at that point or not. So please, there's another poll. Let's take 1 minute to actually vote for this. So if you submit, the link is still going to take you to the next question, which is a group of people are getting into a car. Who has the unspoken right to the front passenger seat? We have the options here. So please, the owner of the car, even if they aren't driving. And then we have a few votes for the oldest person or the guy in the group. And we have also a few selections on the official navigator who knows all the shortcuts through the traffic. So overall, what we're trying to say is with this particular activity, this is trying to highlight how our social norms actually influence even the simplest of situations that we are. And this is going to link us to our conversation over this panel discussion. So sometimes we have to see that we kind of conflict between politeness means following tradition. So this might actually be something that on a normal day, it's not what you would want to do. But because based on the social cultural norms and values that we have in the peculiar spaces that were being brought up, so sometimes politeness actually means following tradition. And then declining sometimes is you being not polite. So we are beginning to see from our realities what's the connection between sociocultural norms, our own authenticity, and then other factors within our environment. So thank you so much for your contributions, and feel free to continue in the chat box where you have any other suggestions. So over to you, Aisha. Okay, perfect. So yeah, we also have a presentation, a very brief presentation based on the research that we have conducted, and we have like an evidence data that we would want to share with you. And I am handing it over to Ernest to walk us through this very brief presentation. And please feel free to continue to use the chat box, and I'll take some moments to also look at some of the comments or conversations going in there. Thank you, and over to you, Ernest.
Right. Thank you, Khadija. So I'll be presenting our evidence from the Nigerian deep dive on the Global Social Norms Adolescent Evidence Review study. Now, why is the discourse on norms so important? Why are they important? Now, somebody might ask. Now, norms are unwritten rules that define what is acceptable, they define what is appropriate, and they define what is obligatory. And they often come with actions within a given group or community, and they influence what people do or not do, or what people are expected to do. Now, norms most times are reinforced and established by positive and negative social sanctions. Right? We found that most times norms are reinforced because there might be rewards or there might be sanctions. There might be, you know, people might be looked at in a certain way that they might not like, or those who perpetrate these norms or those who make sure that these norms are continually occurring, there might be some rewards or some gains for them. Now, examples of some common norms and their impact on women economic empowerment, then social norms, I mean, child early and forced marriage and sexual and reproductive health, and also gender-based violence, because these were the outcomes that we looked at. We looked at how norms impact all of these outcomes. To start with, for women's economic empowerment, some of the norms in this area is that men are the breadwinners and a woman's work is secondary. And I know most of us have heard this over and over. So what is the impact of this? The impact is that it limits women's access to equal pay and decent jobs, oftentimes keeping them economically dependent. Um, if these sort of norms, they reduce women's agency, right? Then for child early and forced marriages, some of the norms here is that girls should marry early to protect family honor. We see that in some climes, this is the norm. Women are married off early, most times due to economic situations or just to protect the family honor. This is what is prevalent in some settings. And the impact of this is that it pushes girls out of school and into dependency, reinforcing circles of poverty, right? Then for sexual and reproductive health, one of the norms here is that men should decide how many children a family has. In some settings, women are not allowed to determine the number of children they ought to have. They are not allowed to make decisions on their reproductive health. And the impact of this is that it restricts women's reproductive choices, increasing health risk and undermining autonomy. When a woman is constantly in the family, she has little or no time for, to improve herself. She has little or no time for economic activities, right? Then for gender-based violence, in some settings, we see that some of the norms are that a man has the right to discipline his wife. The impact of this is that it normalizes intimate partner violence and silences survivors. We found that in some settings, women are not allowed to talk about gender-based violence. If your husband beats you, I mean, it's normal. It's the head of the house. He can discipline you however he wants, right? So these are some of the impacts of these norms. Now, why did we decide to do this review? We found that there's an evidence gap, and non-shifting interventions have the potential to transform the lives of adolescent girls and young women, but oftentimes they lack strong evidence, to prompt donors to invest in some of these programs. If you by yourself, if you do a quick Google search, you will find that some of the evidence on social norms that are, I mean, non-shifting interventions that are effective are often lacking. You will struggle to find some of this evidence, even if you do a quick Google search. Then there's limited documentation on how faith leaders, cultural leaders, and entertainment and media impact harmful social norms for adolescent girls and young women in Nigeria. Then we see that past and current initiatives often engage these actors who are the faith and cultural leaders and entertainment media, yet there is limited evidence on how effective these programs are. Without evidence, it'd be difficult to scale programs. It'd be difficult you know to invest in programs for sustainability. Then this review also fills the gap by analyzing existing evidence and convening experts to generate actionable and scalable strategies for norms programming. So what we did in our evidence generation is we also start with social norms experts and to generate evidence as well, to share some of the findings we have and for them to look at it and provide inputs and strengthen our evidence. Then our evidence base was strengthened for future interventions and sustainable, replicable, and impactful social norms programming. Right. So I've just run us through some of the findings that we had. In total, we had 21 interventions that targeted women's economic empowerment, um, child early forced marriage, sexual reproductive health, and gender-based violence. And some of these interventions used faith and cultural champions and entertainment and media as the approach for norm shifting. Now, for interventions that used entertainment and media, we found that there's a shift from the traditional means, which is the use of TV and radio, to digital and mobile media like YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. However, there's still limited reach of traditional interventions. You see that these interventions that use these traditional means like TV and radio, there's still limited reach, and then there's a broader reach and longer duration than faith and cultural champion interventions. We see that entertainment and media interventions, you know, they reach more people because of the medium in which they carry out their norm shifting activities. But we found that the impact of their norm shifting activities are oftentimes short lived. Then for the media characters challenging gender roles, influence attitudes on GBV, SIH, and gender equity. But then there's a shortage of relatable role models challenging harmful gender norms. Then for interventions that use faith and cultural champions, we found that faith and cultural leaders have strong evidence enabling community embedded change. Um, these faith and cultural champions, because of their influence in the communities, they're oftentimes, better situated to drive this norms messaging. However, there's lack of longitudinal data to access the extent to which they're able to shift norms. Then also, faith and cultural champions are effective in sparking dialogues and attitude shifts within their communities. Then our findings confirm that faith and cultural champions, they have the potential to catalyze. All right. All right. Then for overall insight, we see that entertainment and media interventions, they offer scalable reach and resonance because of the medium with which they carry out their non-citoyen activities. But FCC interventions, they are deep and they offer localized influence. Next slide. Next slide, please. All right. I will run us through some of the impacts of the interventions that we looked at. For sexual and reproductive health, we found programs like chess intervention. This intervention, they enhanced community participation in health and improved service utilization. This intervention increased the uptake of maternal and child health services, including antenatal care, HIV testing, and immunization compliance. They also actively engaged in telecounseling, the use of hotline services, and radio follow-ups in their non-citizen activity. Then for child early and forced marriage, we saw interventions like the CAGI and the Slovak project, which leveraged faith and cultural leaders in promoting positive change about education and empowering adolescent girls. This intervention recorded reduction in prevalence of child early forced marriage, and the impact of the intervention was measured by anecdotal evidence and success stories from adolescent girls that participated in this intervention. Then for women's economic empowerment, interventions often engage faith and cultural leaders to indirectly support women economic empowerment through advocacy and male engagement. And then specifically, they often address social norms that perpetuate gender-based violence by promoting gender equality and positive masculinity. Their efforts oftentimes create an enable environment for women to participate in economic activities while also educating and empowering young women. Now, for gender-based violence, programs that stood out were Slovak and Voice for Change. Now, the Slovak project made use of traditional leaders in Imo State to agree to rewrite bylaws. Then the V4C, for the intervention, they showed a positive behavior change. I mean, young girls who were exposed to this intervention showed a positive behavior change.
Hi, Ernest. Sorry to cut you short, but yeah, we need to wrap this up because we have limited time. So please, can you just wrap it up in 30 seconds so that we can proceed to the panel discussion? Thank you.
All right,
Yeah,
thank you,
just
Khadija. I'll try and wrap up in a few seconds. Now, some of the challenges that we identified, the first was that short-lived projects often result in limited sustainability as the impact diminishes once funding or external support ends. And we see that some of these programs that are short-lived, they do not, the impact that they have is diminishes after funding ends, and they are not able to sustain the non-shift. Then the measurement of norms, there's a gap in norms measurement. And then the third is that there's an over-reliance on financial incentives, which usually undermines sustainability. Because once you take out those incentives, there's no push to sustain those non-shifting activities. Then implementers sometimes encounter pushback from community members due to deeply entrenched cultural and religious beliefs. I mean, yeah, there has to be strategies for addressing the distance. And the strategies vary contextually based on the environment in which these norms are found. Right. Now, what are the implications for future programming? First is there has to be reduced dependency on incentives such that people own these norm shift interventions rather than depend on incentives for norm shift. Then there has to be designed for sustainability. Programs need to move past short-term projects by embedding sustainability plans, linking them with existing systems. That's programs need to key into existing structures that are found within their localities rather than coming up with newer ones. Then there has to be strengthened measurement of norm shift activities so that they can provide evidence that um, the norm shifting activities are actually impactful. Then they need to anticipate and address resistance because some of the non-shifting messages might be new to the community, so they need to anticipate and plan for resistance. Then, last but not the least, programs need to leverage trusted influencers because these influencers are well known within the communities, and then they are trusted, so they're better able to carry out the messaging. Thank you, Anova, for.
all right. Thank you so much, Ernest, and thank you for such presentation. Because of time constraint, I don't think we would be able to further discuss the presentation, but we'll jump directly into the panel discussion. So please, if you have any question based on the presentation, continue to use the chat box. And sorry, please, we are still having challenges trying to reply to the messages in the chat box. Please, IT, give us access to so that everyone can actually see the messages we've been dropping. So yeah, so we are at the panel discussion, and I am so excited to present to us our panelists. And we have the conversation is, or let me say the discussion basically is about how norms insights from entertainment media and faith or cultural champions can be applied, scaled, and sustained. And what we're trying to achieve through this conversation is very simple. We are looking at, or let me say, we are here to talk about how evidence and lessons from interventions can be transformed into action, and this action should be the one that shifts harmful norms and creates opportunities for adolescent girls and young women. And we have our panelists, no one other than Elizabeth Larson. Elizabeth is a postdoctoral fellow at the Center of Gender Equity and Health. Elizabeth has worked in the sexual and reproductive health field for the majority of her career. Her primary research interests include the use of normative approaches to understand sexual and reproductive health and how social norms influence women's and couples' family planning decision making in Francophone West Africa. And our second panelist is Isaac Oritogun. Forgive me if I didn't pronounce it right. And Isaac is a results-driven program officer. He's a researcher and also M&E expert with strong expertise in data analysis and program management. He has supported organizations in health, education, and policy development by designing programs, supervising research, science, and leading M&E frameworks. And Isaac has also used data to drive informed decision making. Our third speaker is no one other than Haishat. Haishat is a public health researcher who collaborates with a dynamic team of experts to conduct comprehensive evaluations, develop actionable insights, and implement effective solutions tailored to the unique needs of West Africa's underserved population. Her role involves designing and executing research methodologies, analyzing complex data sets, and translating findings into practical recommendations that enhance healthcare management practices. So please, you can use the reaction button by clapping and welcoming our panelists. So thank you so much for joining this panel discussion. And we're going to have 3 different rounds. Because we're running out of time, I will try as much as possible to stick to time. And we're going to start with the first round by discussing real-world effectiveness. So we're trying to ground this conversation in reality. So where have norm shifting interventions actually worked and what made that possible? So this is what we're trying to test. And I'm going to start with our first panelist, who is Elizabeth. So Beth, this question is for you. From your perspective, which approaches have proven most effective in norms programming globally? So thank you, and over to you, Beth.
Yeah, hi everyone. And I just want to start off by saying thank you for inviting me. It's such a pleasure to be here talking and discussing with all of you today. So this question that you asked, this is such an important question, but it's also really difficult to answer because honestly, my response is it depends. Like we just kind of saw, norms are so tied to the context. They can look completely different from one community to the next, and even within the same city. So they're woven into culture and institutions and to people's daily lives. And they're always shifting and evolving. And with all of that variation, it's impossible really to point to one model that works everywhere. And, that's probably a good thing that we understand that at the very least. But from the evidence review and from what we've learned over time, there are some patterns. And I think those are some, and I'm going to try to highlight some of those. So first, one thing that we know is that the strongest programs are working across multiple outcomes. So for example, programs that encourage couples to communicate more openly, we not only usually see improvements in family planning, but we also see shifts in attitudes and behaviors around intimate partner violence. And so while the changes might not always be equal, so family planning outcomes tend to improve more consistently, while results around violence might be a bit less steady. The fact that one approach can ripple across different areas is really powerful. The second lesson that we can pull out is around the mechanisms of change. So interventions that only target individuals often fall short in successfully shifting norms. The most effective interventions work at multiple levels at the same time. They create space for community dialogue. They spread new ideas through networks and conversations, and they engage the people whose opinion matters the most. So this includes friends and family, elders, and religious leaders. Because those are the people whose voices carry the most weight in shaping what is acceptable or expected within a given community. And then the final lesson that I kind of want to touch on is about how norms shift over time. So change is rarely linear, and sometimes it's direct, sometimes it's indirect. But we do know that when what people see others doing can be just as influential as what they believe others expect of them. And so all of this is going to play out differently depending on the context, depending on where an intervention is being implemented. And that's why doing formative research and really doing your best to understand the community, its values, its pressures, the people who are exerting the most influence is really important. And then taking those learnings and building them into our understanding, building that understanding into our underlying theories of change is absolutely critical for a successful program implementation. And so just to kind of sum up everything I've said, like I said, there's not really a one-size-fits-all approach, but we do know what makes success more likely, and that's working across issues rather than in silos, engaging whole communities instead of just individuals, and building on the best evidence we have about how change actually happens. And when interventions do those things, I think they're much more likely to create the kind of lasting change that we all want. So thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much, Beth. And just like what I always tell people is, so whenever we're trying to design or solve for this kind of problems, it's very, very important for us to put it at the back of our minds that we are working with the people, not for them only. Yeah. So thank you so much, Beth. I'm directing this question to our second panelist, who is Haishat. So how have entertainment media interventions in your work demonstrated sustained attitudinal change among adolescents and youth?
Yeah, thanks, Khadija, for the question. So, entertainment media, we've found that it can actually be the first point of contact. It's easy to resonate with the people when you're using media to try to speak with them. And when we're saying media, we're talking television, we're talking radio, we're talking more contemporary approaches such as the use of social media. So I find that for an entertainment media intervention to actually resonate more with the people or with the community or even affect any kind of attitudinal change in the youth, it's important to use multi-platforms, and in using multi-platforms, it's best that you also use characters that some of these youth and some of these adolescents, girls and young women are able to relate to. Take, for instance, there's this very popular one, the MTV Sugar. There's MTV Sugar Nigeria, there's MTV Sugar Kenya. It's multi-platform, it's aired in Lagos. And one thing that I found very interesting with them is they were able to air their messages, and they're also able to integrate certain cultural sensitivities. For instance, where they're able to talk about sexual and reproductive health in terms of GBV, HIV, and sexual assaults and things like that in Lagos. But because the northern Nigerians are a bit more conservative, they were not able to really talk about these things in core on their platform. That's for MTV Sugar. So I find that it is easy for them to use relatable characters. And then in the end, like in the North now, if they're able to also integrate certain influencers like the faith leaders, traditional leaders, like places in the North where they're not able to air certain things, once they're able to collaborate with the faith leaders or the traditional leaders, it's easier to get the messages across and it's easier for them to resonate with this. So basically, to sum up everything I've just said, it's just easier to resonate with the youth, young ladies, young boys, by having multi-platforms, radio for easier reach into those more rural areas, television, of course, in a more urban area, and social media for those that are able to have access to internet, more contemporary ways of finding information. And one last thing is feedback loop. The entertainment media, sometimes it's not just enough to air the content, letting people know, creating awareness, it's not enough. Another thing that could be done or is usually done is to get feedback from these people that are consuming the content, trying to see if what they're consuming is actually creating any kind of change. It gives you that feedback mechanism that helps you even fine-tune your content to help them understand what you're trying to pass across even more. Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much, Aisha. And I think the key takeaway always is ensuring that we're using the right medium for the right audience. And then feedback is very, very important because sometimes We design interventions, and if we do not assess to see the impact, we kind of do harm instead of doing good. So it's very important. So thank you so much, Haishat. And my third question goes to Isaac. And Isaac, sorry. Okay. So my next question goes to Isaac before I go to the chat box to get us some of the responses. There's a hot conversation ongoing in the chat box. So, hi, Mr. Isaac. So, how have faith and cultural champion interventions in your work demonstrated sustained attitude? Sorry, I don't know, attitudinal change among adolescents and youth. So, thank you, and over.
Thank you so much, Khadija, and hello, everyone. So we know that in norms and in dealing with norms, it's beyond just behaviors. It's also about rewards and sanctions. And another very key component to that are the reference groups. And then these are a group of people who are custodians of the norms, whose cues are acceptable and accepted in these communities. They are not just gatekeepers, but they are enforcers of these norms. And for us in our work, faith and cultural champions are exactly those reference groups. And they serve not only as authority figures, but they are also the custodians of those norms. Whatever they say goes, and whatever the signal they give to the community, the rest of the community members follow. So, for example, in one of my earliest work around social norms, we targeted, of course, this was in Sokoto and in Bauchi State, we targeted those who we call the Wanzamis or the Walis. So the Wanzamis are those elderly men who at birth, shave the hairs of the baby. And the Walis are people who are like guardians during the wedding ceremonies. They sort of are like, would I say guardians or counselors, and who eventually give out the hand of the girl in marriage to her husband. Our purpose for targeting these people was to pass on the messages around facility delivery and promoting immunization, child immunization. So you see that because these messages comes from these trusted voices, families who were once hesitant to maybe accept the fact that a woman should deliver in the hospital or in the health facility, or a child should accept immunization, begin to reconsider their decisions, about these services or even beyond health services. And I remember a recent study was around corruption, and some key influencers for us were the WDC members, because these WDC members are not only community leaders, they are also heads of the health facility. They sort of control what happens in the health facility. So similarly, in communities where traditional chiefs openly condemn or accept a particular norm, you find out that targeting them becomes a key or a doorway to ensuring that those negative norms are shifted and then positive norms are beginning to be accepted in the community. So by and large, what makes these interventions powerful is not just because they have individual messages, but it's also because of the ripple effect that comes as a result of these community leaders or these cultural champions moving, and ensuring that every other person or everybody they follow, adheres to their rules. So when a respected community champion changes his stance around situations like in my case, facility delivery or FGM or antenatal services and all, it reduces the perceived risk of social backlash for others. And over time, you find out that these repeated signals shift the descriptive norms, which is what people do, and the injunctive norms, which is what people approve of. And then this, if sustained over time, through these trusted champions, will begin to normalize the new behaviors, and we find out that these norms begin to shift in the communities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Isaac. And I feel like we are all making the points in the right track. So I would also drop a few comments on so community entrance is very, very important. And I remembered when we were working on a social behavioral change programming, where we're able to work collaboratively with the gatekeepers from the design of the intervention. So we prototype solutions together with them, and we got their buy-in. So it was easier for us to actually test the impact of the intervention, because these are the people that they have trust. In as much as we feel like we belong to a community, but they still see us as outsiders, but working with the gatekeepers to actually give you that community entrance is very, very important and helpful. So thank you so much. And this takes us to the second round of our conversation, where we're going to talk about design and sustainability. And we'll try as much as possible to keep it to 8 minutes. And so evidence only matters if programs are designed to resonate and last. Let's talk about what makes interventions stick. We've talked about our realities, but now in terms of programming, what makes interventions stick? And I'm starting with Haishet now. So Haishet, from your experience or from your perspective, what intervention design features make programs more likely to resonate with communities?
Um, Thank you so much for that question, Khadija. So, speaking for entertainment media programs now, I'd say that one of those things that helps it to actually stick is relatable storytelling. I mentioned earlier that as long as you're able to give relatable characters to the consumers of the content, you'd be able to create personas in their mind that they feel they can actually work with or they can follow. So when you have relatable storytelling and you're able to convey the message in a way that, they can see themselves in these characters, it is easier for them to adopt the changes that you're trying to sell to them. Well, for the lack of a better word, yes, sell. It's easier for them to adopt those new changes that you're trying to sell to them. Then the use of multi-platform engagements, like I said. So not everyone has access to social media. Yes, I see in the comments that YouTube, Twitter, yes, it has great, TikTok, yes, it has great influence right now, but not everyone is able to not everyone is able to use Twitter, YouTube, or TikTok right now. Some people still rely on radio. So shows kind of like Albishirinku, for instance, they rely solely on radio and they're able to convey their messages down to the grassroots. Those that have zero access to television, YouTube, Twitter, they're able to listen to the radio. And something about co-creation that Khadija mentioned, and then I think someone else in the comment box. So they were able to co-create some of the messages that they were going to convey on Albishirinku with the community leaders, just to test it with them to be sure it's something that would fly and there wouldn't be so much pushback. So because of this, people listened and they were able to bring on some of these community leaders to some of their segments. So they listened to them, and by and large, there was a relatively positive attitudinal change. And another thing is community dialogue. Yeah. So once you integrate community dialogue, like I mentioned, sometimes they cannot air certain things in certain parts of the country. So you have to add community dialogue, and this kind of makes it stick, create some kind of ownership as long as you have involved some of their leaders. So yeah, maybe like cultural framing as well. So you can't go to certain places and begin to talk to them about, family planning. Some people do not want to hear terms like family planning. They'd rather hear things like child spacing, and then backed with certain scriptures that they hear from their religious leaders. So these are some of the things. As long as you create ownership, you are able to speak to them in a culturally sensitive tone. You are able to create personas that are relatable to them. There are ways for you to actually help, or maybe the intervention or the impact of the intervention lasts way longer.
That's very, very interesting. And I wish this webinar is like 2 hours, because I feel like, okay, I have more to share. So, but quickly, yeah. So, but quickly, speaking of designing and prototyping with the community people, I remembered when we were able to test a particular tool, which is more like, how do we really use edutainment as we're trying to interact or discuss on sensitive issues. And we were able to understand what are the types of games in those communities. And we design our data collection tools to suit in those games. So it's more like we were playing games, but we were actually collecting data. So I feel like understanding the context and like making data collection or designing interventions, not really the serious, you have your ODK tool, you're trying to collect the data, but like really understanding and creating a safe space for data collection. So that's very interesting to hear. And our next question is for Elizabeth. So, Beth, many interventions faced issues with short durations, weak measurement, and backlash risk. So, what are the biggest pitfalls implementers should avoid using your experience?
Yeah, that's another great question. So I'll kind of touch on all three of these and kind of talk through how to avoid some of these pitfalls. So I'm going to start by actually saying that one of the most interesting things that we've learned is that short duration on its own actually isn't always the problem, which we found quite surprising. So while we found that entertainment media interventions really need time, usually at least 2 years to bring about positive results, when we looked at faith-based and cultural champion interventions, the picture was a little bit different. And actually, some of those that ran for less than a year were just as likely to succeed as those that lasted much longer. So here, I think the lesson is that it's not just about how long an intervention runs, but what matters is who you're, like a lot of people are saying, it's who you're engaging, how you're engaging them, and whether you've thought carefully about the pathways and the mechanisms of change in that specific context. And so that brings me to backlash. And one thing that we know is that, leaders and other influential people in the community play a very powerful role in driving widespread change, but they can also reinforce harmful norms if not engaged thoughtfully. And so the difference here comes down to basically how we equip them. The most successful efforts connect traditional or faith-based teachings with principles of equity and use approaches like community dialogue, storytelling, or partnerships with secular organizations to spread those ideas more widely. And so, like many of you have already mentioned in the comments, understanding the local context and involving key community members from the very beginning is one of the best ways to reduce backlash. And in this global evidence review that we did, we found surprisingly weak evidence of community engagement in the design, implementation, and the measurement of norms programs. And too often the voices of the people whose buy-in is critical to change are overlooked. And so that's such a large pitfall that we need to avoid. Instead, programs are much more likely to succeed when those voices are part of the process from start to finish. So helping to identify barriers, shaping solutions, and supporting implementation efforts. And so also, like you said, measurement is such a common pitfall. I think we're all so focused on implementation and successfully implementing that we forget about measurement. Too many of the studies that we saw within our evidence review claim to measure norms, but they were actually measuring personal attitudes. And while those can be a useful proxy, they don't capture how group expectations and practices, so those injunctive and those descriptive norms that we were talking about, can actually influence behavior. And moving forward, we need to prioritize real norms measurement, use validated tools from existing interventions and evaluations. I promise you they're out there, you can find them. And especially if you look in the evidence review, they're there. And be more transparent about how interventions adapt along the way. And so that way we can strengthen both the evidence and the impact of our work. And so just to quickly sum this up, the biggest pitfalls to avoid, are focusing too much on duration, overlooking community voices, engaging leaders without strategy, and relying on weak measurement. By moving past those challenges, that's how we can really drive real and lasting change with our interventions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Beth. And we have 6 minutes to go. So try as much as possible, in as much as this is a very interesting conversation. But so we'll try as much as possible to wrap it up. So Isaac, this is for you. How do you propose future programs embed sustainability and local kind of work?
Okay, thank you again, Khadija. That's a good question. Initially, right, I think that to truly embed sustainability in the work we do, we must allow the people see themselves in the implementation. So, for example, interventions must resonate with the everyday life of the community members, and must resonate around the realities of these people we're trying to reach. So we must be able to use familiar cultural tools like community dialogue. In the North, they have what we call the majelisas, the ceremonies, whether the wedding ceremonies or the naming ceremonies and all of that. And they are the normal social religious rituals around them. With this embedment kind of methodology, you see that it carries weight because they begin to see themselves in the light of the interventions that are being brought. And then to truly embed sustainability, and we need to ensure that these interventions are not just one-off projects, but that they are carried forward by the community members themselves. So like the project I was telling you about in Sokoto, we found out that beyond the life cycle of the project, for sustainability purposes, we embedded the WDC members, the religious and community leaders into the project. So we found them sort of finding a way to continue the project even after the life cycle of the project. So that starts with positioning the cultural or faith leaders not just as messengers, but as co-owners of the project. So community members must begin to see themselves as part and parcel of the project, and not just you coming to dump your ideas on them, as the case may be. So for youth, embedding sustainability in social media programming might include harnessing peer networks and digital platforms and social media influencers. And when they are partnered with, you find out that they are able to implement the project beyond just the life cycle of the project. Thank you.
Perfect. Yeah, yeah. So I totally agree, more especially with the fact of making the community leaders actually feel that particular ownership of the intervention. So it's more helpful when you make them understand we are here to do the intervention, but like you are the drivers of this particular program that we're trying to do. So yeah, because we're running out of time, we'll try as much as possible to quickly move to audience question and answers. So I know that I've been seeing a lot of engagement in the chat box. So please, if we have 2 quick questions that you want the panelists to actually answer before, yes, we have my colleague Adisoji bring up the next question. So please, 2 quick questions. So yeah, please, can you use the icon? You can raise your hand if you have a question that you do. Okay, yeah.
Okay, while we're typing out our questions, so I see someone say, I think we need to have a sustainability assurance plan right from the beginning of any project or intervention. Yes, I 100% agree with that, because when we are having discussions about sustainability, I get a lot of because it's like an afterthought for some programmers. It's not something that they were attempting to even embed in the projects to start with. So yes, just like having an M&E plan, you should have a sustainability plan. So thank you, Mr. Michael Titus, for that contribution, very meaningful. So I'll hand back over to our moderator to take the questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Haishat. And okay, I think Femi, please, can you just ask the question? Yeah, because there's a lot of engagement that has already happened in the chat box. If you can just ask the question here. Yeah, Femi mentioned that he has dropped a question in the chat box. Or do they not have access? So
I'm responding to a question from Femi right now, I think,
Okay,
that they
perfect.
put in the, yeah. So the question was, do you suggest that faith-based interventions tend to have quicker results than edutainment-based interventions? And I wouldn't say yes. I think it was clear from what we've learned that it takes longer for edutainment and like entertainment media interventions to achieve success. But actually what we were seeing was that the success of faith-based interventions was similar across duration. So I can't say that, the shorter faith-based interventions are more successful, or, but we can say that we think there's something other than duration that's influencing the success of faith-based interventions, and that's more likely to be the community engagement, the leader engagement that happens within those. But great question.
So yeah, there's also another question here. So any of the panelists can actually answer this question. So it goes, Are there SBC models generally applied or adopted in SBC programming to get desired results in other social impact programs? So in as much as we have a lot of amazing questions coming in, so I think our team can actually, we should have your email. So maybe we can actually answer some of the questions via email. So yeah, any of the panelists, please can answer this, and we can quickly wrap up.
So thank you so much, and thank you for that question. For SBC modeling, there are different ways that your intervention can be channeled to addressing the kind of change you want. I think all of it just boils down to community ownership. So whatever kind of intervention you're implementing, it must be an intervention that is rooted in the lived experiences of the community members. If you're able to achieve that in whatever way, then you are one step into achieving success. Thank you.
Right. A lot of questions are just coming in. I wish we have all the time that we can actually respond to your questions, but unfortunately, it's already 5, so we need to quickly wrap up so that other people can actually proceed with their engagements. So please continue to drop your emails in the chat box, and we can see how we can have access to the back-end data so that we can answer some of your questions. So there's going to be a barcode, and we would love your feedback. And yeah, so as we're trying to scan the barcode, I would like to use this opportunity to thank everyone for joining, especially our panelists, for this amazing and interactive conversation. I feel like going forward, we should have 1.5 hours because these conversations have a lot to unpack, and there are a lot of exciting comments actually coming in the chat box. And I think I would give the panelists maybe 1 minute to quickly wrap it up with any key message that you have. So thank you so much for your contributions, and it's been an amazing, amazing conversation. So I think, Beth, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So again, yeah, thanks everybody for having me. It's been such a pleasure. And I think, my key takeaway from everything is that really for norm shifting interventions to be sustainable, we need to move away from top-down fixes to more context-driven approaches that engage communities from the start, work across outcomes, and include strong norm social measurement approaches. So thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.
Aishat?
Thanks for attending, Beth. Thank you so much for attending, Isaac. And thank you for having me to listen to what I have to say. I'm glad that a lot of people had questions to ask. I'm sorry we couldn't get to every single one of them, but we'll try to reach out. But there's one particular person that I'm pretty interested in the question she has. I see you dropped your email address. I'll personally reach out to you on that. That's Basirat Raza Shoaib. I'll reach out to you on that because there's something we're actually working on, and you might be interested in what we have. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Hi, Isaac.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, Khadija, and thank you to the team. And for me, I just want to say that we must stop treating norm change as just short-term advocacy, but instead we must invest in the long term and make it a community-owned process, and ensure that all the major gatekeepers, especially faith and cultural champions, who are custodians of both the positive and negative norms, are fully involved in programming. Thank you.
Right. So as we wrap up, one thing actually stands out for me, which is real change is driven not just by policies, but by voices that shape hearts and culture. Today, we've seen how entertainers and faith leaders can challenge the status quo, inspire action, and normalize respect and equality. Each of us in our own spaces has that same power to influence. Based on the conversation, we can see that each and every one of us on this call has a role to play. So let's leave here motivated to use our voices with purpose and to keep inspiring for change. This was really an amazing and a wonderful conversation, and I am looking forward to more conversations like this. And once again, thank you, a very big thank you to the panelists for making their time, and then also for the participants. So I feel like we still have 97 participants on the call, which is actually a very good turnout. So thank you so much and for your time and contributions. And thank you also to the PIC team for making this possible. So with this, please share your experience using the barcode, and we look forward to replying or responding to some of your questions via email. So thank you so much, and bye for now.